Hello and welcome. I'm very excited to present to you on this latest episode of Gotham TV. I'm here with Chris Regan via Skype of RF Venue, and here to talk about the WaveTower. WaveTower is brand new to market. So Chris, if it's okay with you, first of all, you should say hi to the folks.
Hey everybody, how's it going?
If it's okay with you, I am so excited about this product. I want to stumble through a description that sort of shows how we immediately put it to use. But please jump in, and if I'm over enthusiastic about some points or just wrong, please tell me. And then I know you have a more formal presentation. First off, I want to talk about what is the WaveTower. It is a small box that contains a spectrum analyzer and also a way to talk to a database, basically, a database on the back end and a kind of web interface on the front end. A lot of us are familiar with spectrum analyzers, handheld devices, usually with LCD screens, or the older ones with CRT screens, and you manually interact with the device at the location that you're measuring. Imagine if you could send a spectrum analyzer to a remote location and have it upload the information, the RF information, to a central database that then you could log into and see all of that data over time. And that is the genius of WaveTower. It's a small box, and there's a funny story of why I don't have one here to show you, but it is about the size of a paperback novel. It runs on 5-volt DC. It's got a BNC. Actually, if we have one on Still Store, that would be, I think, helpful. Jared, it's got a BNC or an SMA, SMA connector.
BNC input. Oh. Yeah, the SMAs for the GPS module. We could take a look at a close up of the hardware.
I think we're seeing it now.
Yeah. Okay.
So it's got a GPS connector, like Chris mentioned, and it's got an Ethernet port, and you can install this anywhere to measure RF activity, and it will show up on a web page, and it will store it internally as well as upload it. I think I'm going to jump right into why I don't have a box to show you, which is we got one, and 3 days later we had the perfect use to deploy it where we really needed it. We had a major installation at a network, at a cable network, and they were having issues with their radio mics, but they were the worst kind of issues. They were intermittent RF interference issues. So, normally what we'd have to do is physically go there with a spectrum analyzer, spend lots of time babysitting the spectrum analyzer, hope that their intermittent issues happen while we're there with the spectrum analyzer. Now all we have to do is we sent this box ahead of time. I physically installed it behind. They have a Venue, Electrosonics Venue rack receiver. So I plugged it into the RF output, the loop out of that Venue, and asked them to let me know when they had RF interference. Just note the date and the time, and then I was able to log into the web page and just compare when they had RF interference with what the spectrum analyzer was seeing. And sure enough, we were able to diagnose some issues with some filters and a faulty transmitter, and it was just super helpful and super efficient. I think it's also worth noting that these kind of customers, when you talk about taking a box and putting it in their like most sacred equipment room. Like this room is on super lockdown, and you say, yeah, it's got to go out and it needs to be connected to the internet. There are lots of red flags that get raised. But because of the way RF Venue have designed this box, that was the easiest conversation I ever had with an IT department. Basically, all the box needs to do, and Chris, correct me if I'm wrong, but from an IT's perspective, it looks like the box is surfing a web page. Like there's no special ports, port 80, that's all it seems like. Nothing from the outside needs to go into talk to the box in terms of IP. Super easy setup. From the time I plugged it in at their secure facility, between that and walking back to my contact's desk, the box was already uploading information. And it was that easy. And then the way that Chris provisions the software, RF Venue provisions software, super easy to give them logins, we have logins. Really, Chris, I just, well done. Super, it's a great box. So that is sort of my, that's my excitement about the box. Chris, I know that, please fill in all the gaps, and I know you have lots of visual aids for us.
Yeah, I can walk through the application live here in a second, but just to comment, that's a great application where you've got an intermittent source. It's really hard to nail down, and we're starting to see a lot more of that as the spectrum gets more crowded, and as we're just using more wireless in general on an ongoing basis. But yeah, let me. I'm just going to share my screen. Give me 1 second, guys. Peter, just give me a heads up when we're good on this.
Yeah,
lag.
We're got it. Yep.
Cool. Okay. Yeah. I mean, in a nutshell, WaveTower lets you remotely monitor and manage spectrum over the web. It's a connected hardware platform, as Peter mentioned. So you've got a hardware device. That's that box. We call them towers. Those continuously scan, and they send that data back to your WaveTower account, so you can pull up an iPad or any browser wherever you are, and duck in on spectrum conditions in near real time or on a historical basis across town or on the other side of the globe. We've got units up in, I think, 20 different countries at this point now. And the reason we got involved in this is we're starting to see, as we market antennas and antenna distribution and RF over fiber and all this other stuff, talking with the teams that are responsible for either installing it or managing it, building it out. If there's more wireless coming in on an expansion project, there's just more wireless going in and not that many people to stay on top of it, compounded with the changes in the spectrum, which are making life harder. So we were kind of thinking through, is there a unified platform for this that these customers could access and share around, so that everyone could, kind of get on the same page with respect to what's happening with their wireless system and optimize its performance over time. And so the hardware, which is just an item you purchase like any other piece of wireless gear, there are no software setup charges on our free plan. We have some other enterprise managed services, which are a bit more kind of hands-on and for large deployments. But for the most part, you just buy one or more of these towers. We assign them on your account, and you give them internet and power, and they do their thing. It's a very plug-and-play box. It scans to about 3 gig, which will cover all the VHF gear, UHF, ISM bands. And that GPS module, if you can get a good GPS lock at the location, that will auto-locate it on the application. And that BNC input, Peter mentioned using the loop out on the Venue system. That's a great way to set it up. You could also just hang an antenna on it and have it scan ambiently, so to speak, to get some scan data from a room that maybe doesn't have a wireless system in it yet. But if you do tie it directly to a spare output on a distro or a Cascade port or something like that, that's a really good way to show the WaveTower platform exactly what the rest of your system is going to see, using the same antennas and so forth. And further to Peter's point, it's purely outbound in terms of its communication. So it's going to ride with the HTTP traffic, super low bandwidth. There's a lot of compression involved to really get that to be as lightweight as possible. So for sending this somewhere to configure, you could send this to a location that you might be operating in the future, and you could have someone connect this on site that has absolutely no idea what it is or anything about RF spectrum. So it is handy in that respect, as well as for lowering the barrier to getting devices onto a network. The two primary applications that there are, there's sort of blends of the two here, of course, are for a fixed installation where it's going to live with a wireless rack. And be remotely accessed when needed over time to monitor changes, pull scan data out to do remote coordination, to perhaps recommend new frequencies or changes to transmitters that are on site based on new conditions in the venue. But then there's also this send ahead application where you put one of the towers in a FedEx box and you send it to where you're going to be, have it configured there locally on site, and then you can pull back the actual operating conditions on the ground to do, a number of different things. It could be completely pre-configuring and programming your transmitters before you even get there, so that they'll operate, based on what the actual conditions are like on the ground, but also to influence what to bring in the first place. So, which electro band, which Sennheiser band is going to be appropriate for this location, given what the DTV landscape looks like here, or given what a peak traffic time, say it's a venue where they operate, primarily at night, for shows or something like that. You could look at what it looks like during the day versus what it looks like during a peak traffic time, so that the data you use to coordinate your system would be based on the most rigorous kind of set of RF conditions.
Particularly now, I think, Chris, with cell carriers firing up in 600 megahertz, it's really great to sort of see what exactly is happening compared to what their database says is going to happen.
Yeah, definitely. You'll be able to identify those 600 megahertz links that T-Mobile is putting up and firing up. They'll be easily identifiable, just like a DTV station, once they're in range. And so the account structure here, the way this works is you can have one tower on your account, you can have 100 towers on your account, but then you determine who can access what. So you can issue logins and set permissions so that someone that maybe you're going to be collaborating with on a project on a temporary basis could get on, and you can collaborate online to coordinate for that project, but then move the tower to a different location and invite someone else. So you're in control of this data. So I'm just going to take a quick look over here. We'll jump into a live demo. So you just log in with your account and password, and you can see we've got a number of towers on this demo account, red being inactive and green being active. I think this one was headed for a trade show, so that one's not up. But we've got a number here in the New England area where we're based, and so we can take a look at one or more of these to give you a feel for what this platform can do. Pretty self-explanatory user interface. You've got a map with the towers that are on your account, and you've got a table below here that's going to show various settings for these individual towers. You can edit these addresses, edit the names to however you like. It'll also let you know if you have an active GPS sync or not. It can be tricky sometimes indoors for that to lock in.
I can say from personal experience, the box that we put in the control room or in the equipment room couldn't pull a GPS signal, but all I had to do is manually enter in the. I think I just entered in the address.
Right, and that'll drop it on there. And there's a setting in here if you're editing the tower to kind of have the application look for it or just ignore it.
Yep.
So let's take a look at. We've got one in Fenway Park here. none in Yankee Stadium yet, but so this page is the typical spectrum trace you would see in a lot of wireless applications, Workbench, System Designer, whatever. So this unit looks like it's scanning from 400 megahertz up to 1 gig, and you can see the DTV stations, the general kind of noise that's present here. And within this spectrum trace view, it's gonna continually update every couple of seconds based on what the length of that span is. So if this was set to like 500 megahertz to 600 megahertz, it would be updating more quickly. It's just less data points for the back end to process. And as you mouse over the spectrum, you can see the amplitude in dBm as well as the frequency readout. And then because we're in a live chart here, we can just click to drag to look at a section of this RF spectrum from the stadium. So you can just zoom in, as close as you'd like to look at an individual frequency, and then you just click reset zoom in the upper right here to take you back to your full span. So it's still pulling all of that data. We're just kind of zooming in on the chart. And what's typically recommended, since it is an outbound communication from the tower, is you kind of set a range that you're happy with down here in the start frequency, end frequency, and you kind of leave it. And then if you want to narrow in, you can do so within the chart, because it will take a couple minutes for that to update. It's not like resetting the span on a real-time analyzer right in front of you. So a couple different views, a couple different chart views that we have here to look at. This one in green would be the current dBm. We can also look at a 24-hour max hold. That's going to be the cumulative scan data that's come in over the last 24 hours. That would sort of be your kind of worst case scenario. That's going to have the highest noise floor and the most intermittent signals. And then the third one we have is a 24-hour average hold. So this can be a nice baseline to set, what quote unquote normal conditions might look like over a 24-hour period. And then you can export this data, either the current scan, if you look in the bottom left-hand side here, a 24-hour max hold, or the 24-hour average, to a CSV that you could import into Shore's Wireless Workbench, Professional Wireless Systems, IAS, and we're working on some other formats as well, so that you can kind of continue the rest of your normal coordination process in your software of choice.
Yeah, I had to pull some frequencies right before we started talking for this network. And to be able to do it while looking at the live scan from our office in Long Island City was really magical, I have to say. Just this is what this spectrum is right now, right there, and these are the frequencies that I'm going to give you that will work right now.
The other thing that's cool, because we're in a browser, is you can open up a bunch of tabs. So like you could have multiple locations up and be able to jump across them pretty efficiently. Because it's just going to run inside Chrome here. So a few other things I'll point out here before we maybe move on and take some questions. This bottom right-hand section is kind of your playback controls. This will flip back through previous or next scans based on where you are historically. And this calendar picker here will have the historical data, so you could go back to a peak time to look at an exact moment or section of RF spectrum activity to diagnose a interference problem. That's
exactly what we used. We compared the list that we got from the client to typing in the date on the calendar and the time on the calendar, and it worked great.
So in the upper right here, you've got these two buttons, comments and my frequencies. Pretty straightforward. All the users that are on this account, or that are on this tower, I should say, that you've given access, will be notified via email for any comments that are put in here. So it can be a handy kind of discussion thread if you're trying to either diagnose an interference issue or work with multiple parties to determine what frequency bands to load or what frequencies you're going to use in a coordination. And there'll be some more advances to the UI that'll come along with that in terms of like posting files and that kind of thing. But that's kind of where all the communication lives. Which, if you've ever coordinated wireless across multiple people in your inbox, it can get pretty disorganized pretty quickly. So the hope is that if we've got a permanent location for a tower for an event, we could do a lot of that in here. Now, the My Frequencies section is where the monitoring portion of the platform comes into play. This is where we can manually add in frequencies. So, we put our frequency on the left here in the table. There's a dropout threshold set to -70. You can change that depending on what your preference is. You can put in the equipment model. And then if you click Update My Frequencies, this will drop a marker at that particular location. And so that if you have your system set up and you want to monitor it on an ongoing basis remotely, can be really handy for an installation, because a lot of times a system is commissioned and over time the frequencies might move on you or more equipment might come in. This is a handy reference for what equipment is in what location and on what frequency, so that there's a sort of consistent log of where things are. And you can also import inventory from, right now it's from a Shore Wireless Workbench inventory file. So if we went over to desktop, grabbed one of those files, clicked Update My Frequencies, this will pull in all of the information from that inventory file. I didn't get too creative with the labeling there, but you get the idea. And so depending on whether the scan is pulling through a frequency that meets that threshold, you'll get that red or green marker. Okay?
Yeah, it's really a great interface, and I'm looking forward to the changes that are coming.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things that's really exciting about developing for the web is that you deploy it and it's there. You don't have to update anything on your end. And there's firmware updates that happen automatically to the units as well as they sort of check into the server. So it's always up to date with the latest and greatest. And there's some interesting things that we've got in the works for this around event notification, fundamental changes to the operating environment that will go to you without you having to sort of live inside the application to be continually checking it out. So right now it's kind of a acquisition and display sort of platform, and now it's moving into the next phase where the platform will have a lot more outbound interaction with the user base.
It's great, and we have a couple of use case scenarios. One, obviously, we described, but yeah, I mean, if you're shooting in a distant location, send this box ahead. We're going to have rental packages where it's this and a 4G router, and you can just tell anybody at the remote location, just give it power and let it go.
Yep.
And I think it's worth noting too, it does have some local storage if it doesn't have connectivity. Is that right, Chris?
So that isn't quite live yet, but it will be. That's this offline recording mode where the unit will write to its internal drive or to an external drive for later upload to the web account. It's in testing right now. So if you can't get internet, and I know a lot of location sound goes down in remote stretches of the world, you would still be able to access that historical data in more of like a recording mode kind of fashion. So yeah, super excited about it. I think that as the wireless gets a little bit more challenging, this is definitely a capability that we should consider. And the more that we kind of get out there, I think the larger the opportunity for new shared access, new public-facing towers, and those types of things become possible. So Peter, if there's anything else, unless there's anything else, I'd be fine to open it up to Q&A.
No, yeah, let's see. Are there any questions? Anybody have any?
Do you foresee this being something that, if you're working on TV and film, you would have in your kit on a day-to-day basis, or?
So, question. I don't know if you heard that, Chris. Do we foresee this as being something that you would have in your kit and use it on a day-to-day basis? Chris, do you want to?
I mean, I would say if you're going to be on site and you're looking for something to monitor in real time, or you want to have it like directly in front of you on a cart, I would say that this would be perhaps complementary to a real-time spectrum analyzer rather than a full-on substitute, just because of network delay, latency, internet access you may or may not have at that particular location. But I think in terms of scouting locations, or even if you're going to be there for multiple days, having it running just to check it and look at the 24-hour activity, you might be able to get ahead of any issues that maybe you didn't see in real time when you were there. That'd be.
I totally agree. Yeah, I think production sound mixers. If I were working off of a cart, RF Explorer or a TTI unit or something like that would be the way I would go. But if I were a sound supervisor in a reality television capacity, or I managed a facility that relied on wireless mics, I would absolutely have this so that I could always remotely monitor the spectrum. And I'm absolutely looking forward to some of the alerts that you're putting into the software to let me know what's going on and what changes are going on. The other scenario I see is we now have 2 boxes, one in Atlanta and one in New York, in our rental department. So if you're a production sound mixer and you're going to shoot somewhere far away, it absolutely can be used as a rental item and deployed in a distant location.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I mean, yeah, and I think to your point about if you're shooting in a studio or you're in a sound stage, if they already have one there and you're able to access it, that could be a really powerful tool, because then the provider of the studio or soundstage can have kind of a unified place for access to the RF spectrum for people that are moving through, rather than you bringing your own. So there's definitely a couple different use cases like that, and I think the fixed installation it could be really powerful, especially when in a lot of these facilities where you've got multiple studios that are all interoperating. So what's going on in the studio one day is going to be completely different than what's going on the next day, because there might be multiple other shoots or multiple other broadcasts happening along next to that. So how do you account for those changes over time? This could be a good way to do that.
And we're sort of getting a little off topic, but I think that's where the social aspect of your web interface is going to be really important, so that sound mixers can start to communicate what frequencies they're using and what they have and who's going to be where. And yeah, I think that's it's really like a fantastic platform.
Mm-hmm.
Any other questions? All right. Any of you guys have questions? No? $8.99 is MAP. Shipping now, ready to
shipping now.
Go. Yeah. If anybody wants a demo, contact us. If anybody wants a rental, we'll come up with a rental package. Contact us. And Chris, thank you so much.
No problem. And I'm just Chris at rfvenue.com. If you want to shoot me an email, I'm happy to answer any questions you might have. In terms of availability, definitely get with Gotham because they're out ahead on it, and I think gonna be able to provide some really interesting packages around it.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Chris. Will you stay with us while we do the little outro bit, please?
Will do.
All right. Video archives, gothamsound.tv. Follow us on Facebook and Twitter for the latest news, and please send your ideas for future shows to info@gothamsound.com. I'm Peter Schneider. My email is peters@gothamsound.com. I'm happy to talk to you about this product. Chris, thank you so much for joining us.